Someone Like You by Sparkypasker. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 7. Izuku's last day at Aldera Middle School was just a week away. He knew he needed to start looking for high school options if he was going to be able to continue his education. It didn't take long for Izuku to realize that when it came to the conditions of becoming a crime fighter, Inko never mentioned anything about having to go to high school. Hell, she never even mentioned that he had to graduate middle school. Izuku had known Inko long enough to know that she always meant what she said and what she didn't say. She didn't care one way or the other about his education. As far as she was concerned, if he didn't go to high school, she couldn't be blamed. A lot of people don't go to high school, and there are only a handful in the entirety of Japan that accept quirkless students. If he couldn't cut it, Inko couldn't be called a bad mother. Him not going to high school would just be a fact of life. Middle school was the same. She couldn't be blamed if he wasn't able to complete the requirements for graduation. Quirkless people just weren't smart enough to do things normal people could, as if being quirkless meant you can't add 2 plus 2. Frankly, if it wasn't a normal thought process that he had been privy to his entire life, he would be insulted. Izuku spent a bit of time combing through the information about the schools in Japan that accept quirkless students, and came up with the same thought patterns. They were more like daycare centers. The quirkless students were separated from the rest of the student body and given menial tasks that just meet the requirements for graduation. There is no possibility of academic success at those institutions. That is not what Izuku was looking for. He wanted something that would challenge him, something that would push him to enhance his critical thinking skills and would give him marketable traits. He spent the next few hours after that looking at online options. They were actually preferable all around because then Izuku wouldn't have to put up with being demeaned in real life. It's less likely that he would be classmates with someone who would know him, so it's more likely that he would actually be treated with the same respect as any other student. Fortunately, all of the online students based in Japan had anti-discrimination clauses. These were usually meant for people who had, quote, villainous quirks or, quote, mutant quirks. But the verbiage was vague enough that he could use it as a reason to deny them access to his quirk registration. Unfortunately, all of them only offered the same basic classes: math, history, science, language arts, etc. There were no electives beyond just advanced versions of the core subjects. He wanted something more, something that would be far beyond what just a normal education would provide. Izuku debated looking at schools outside Japan, but didn't know where to start. Maybe China? The US? But if he did that, he would have to be careful of which institutions he chose. Japan went through a xenophobic phase shortly before All Might had his debut. During that time, they greatly diminished what out-of-country schools they were recognizing as a legitimate education. Then All Might debuted with his red, white, and blue American-style getup and changed society's mind about working with those outside the country. The borders were open to allow in businesses and students from outside Japan, but the rules about education didn't relax quite as much. Politicians wanted to make sure they could mold the minds of Japan's youth and set very specific standards about what could or could not be taught. They weren't going to just give that up. Izuku hesitated. Those schools would be much more expensive. He would have a hard time coming up with the money to pay tuition. Well, he may as well check. It's not like he has to choose one right that second. If he didn't find what he's looking for, he would only go back to step 1. It's not like he would go back any further. China was going to be the first place he checked. It's closer, and there are a good chunk of politicians that are friends with those in Japan, so there are more schools that are accredited. Not only that, but they have a much larger population, so statistically, they should have more options to choose from. Well, that's a big no good, buddy. There might be more schools, and he even hesitates to call them that, but they are worse than schools in Japan. Each institute is a combination physical and online campus. The physical locations are dumping sites for quirkless or other unwanted individuals. That's why they say they don't check quirk status. It's because they don't care one way or the other. The institutions survive on minimum government subsidies and volunteers. The tuition that the online students pay goes straight into the pockets of the owners. The students never see a thing. The children on the physical locations are, quote, adopted, read that, sold into human trafficking, or die of starvation. The online students are, quote, offered a multitude of job opportunities upon graduation. Luckily for Izuku, they kept immaculate records. Those who accept the job offers are sold to the highest bidder and then just disappear. The worst part, this is normal. There are no laws against this business practice. They don't talk about it because if they did, then he never would have looked at this in the first place. But there are no laws against it. But if Izuku had to be completely honest, he wasn't surprised. Over the centuries, many different countries have taken advantage of the black market to fund themselves. That doesn't make it right. But there is also nothing a single person can do about it, at least not right now. As much as Izuku would like to believe he would be the one to change things, he needed to be realistic. The world would not be made right in his lifetime. The best he can do is be a good role model and hope that enough people take his ideals to heart and fix things in the future. Izuku sighed. Maybe he should just skip high school. He knows he hasn't looked at everything yet, but with what he found, he was feeling dejected. He was starting to believe he was the last of a dying breed. He needed some advice. He logged onto the Quirkless forum and noticed some notifications of unread messages on the group chat. He took a few minutes to read back. No soup for you. What's everyone doing? Freakazoid. Not a lot. Just playing some games. Big Brother 23. I'm on my way to work. Night shift. Deku. I'm looking into high schools. CSI guy. Good luck. I went to one and I may as well have just been in elementary school. No soup for you. I didn't go to high school. Big Brother 23. Me neither. Freakazoid. I didn't either. Deku. I'm trying to find one outside the country, but not having much luck. CSI guy. Oh yeah, I've heard that Japan is actually one of the better countries for quirkless education. Big Brother 23. Yikes. That's a scary thought. Freakazoid. Hey, I just remembered. I got a cousin in the US who has a quirk, by the way. And when they were in high school, they were doing some sort of project, and long story short, they were mouthing off last Christmas that it wasn't fair that the quirkless got a special school that had connections with Ivy League universities and scholarships for free schooling. Deku. Oh, what's it called? Freakazoid. It's called St. Damian's School for the Quirkless. It's supposed to be pretty elite. I'm actually kind of bummed that I didn't hear about it until long after I would have been eligible to go. I can only imagine what my cousin would have said if I told him I was a student. I'm sure the look on his face would have been chef's kiss. Deku. Thanks. I will look into it. Smiley face. No soup for you. You may want to do that quickly then. Graduation is just around the corner. Izuku logged off with a small smile. Talking to them always made him feel better. He went to a search engine and typed in the school's name. They were also a hybrid institution. Their website showed pictures of a beautiful desert campus. A statue had recently been erected in the cactus garden of their founder. It was originally built hundreds of years ago in an effort to make sure the dwindling quirkless population had access to quality education. Izuku was intrigued. Their website claimed they accepted students from all over the world. And the best part? Their diplomas were recognized in Japan. The founders must have had some very powerful friends in some very high places. The next thing Izuku took a look at was their curriculum and electives. They said they could get their students accepted into any university of their choice, and as proof, they claimed the most diverse set of electives. And they were not wrong. Izuku wasn't sure if there was going to be any other institution that offered what they did. Not only were there classes available in quirk analysis, but also in computer science, criminal science, nutrition, finances, and law. Izuku really believed this school took education seriously. He could take classes that he would not only enjoy, but would also greatly benefit him in being a crime fighter. But, just to be safe, Izuku took a look under the hood, metaphorically speaking. He cracked into their site to take a look at their finances and the background of their governing body and their instructors. Everything seemed to be above board. Izuku then took a look at their tuition. As expected of an elite school, they also had an elite price. But thank God, Freakazoid was right. There were scholarship options for qualifying students. Considering his finances and his intelligence, Izuku was confident he could make it work. Before he could double guess himself, Izuku sent in his application. This was going to be the best school he would find, and he was not going to allow his education to slip through his fingers. End of chapter. Chapter 8. A mere week after applying to St. Damian's, Izuku graduated from middle school. There was little fanfare at the ceremony. Everyone was so caught up with celebrating with their friends and family, they didn't pay any attention to the quirkless kid that graduated with them. It was unlikely he was ever going to cross their minds after today. Not unless they see some story in the news about a quirkless person committing suicide or something like that. Thankfully, Izuku's classmates being preoccupied meant he was able to walk out of the school grounds unseen and alone. Why alone? Because Inko didn't show up. And why not? Because she was a poor single mother who had to sacrifice being able to see her only child graduate. Oh, poor Inko! But a sacrificial mother is an honorable mother. Society saw her as the epitome of what a mother should be, rather than the neglectful POS she actually was. Izuku had realized that fact a long time ago, but it was only recently that he was able to admit that to himself. It was shortly after that Izuku began to think of his mother as a roommate, rather than a parental figure. When Izuku arrived back at the apartment, he went to his room to put away his diploma and change into more comfortable clothing. A notification flashed on his computer. He sat at his computer and opened his email. It was a message from St. Damian's for Izuku to take an entrance exam. The invitation expired in a week, so Izuku needed to make sure to take it by then. Izuku wasn't really sure when he was going to take it. The original plan was to exercise and work more, but Izuku hadn't returned to the gym since the day he had last spoken with the owner. He couldn't talk himself into going back. He was sure it would just be awkward, and it was hard for Izuku to convince himself otherwise. As far as he was aware, he was still welcome there, but he didn't know if he could stand being in a vulnerable state around someone who thinks he's remarkable simply because he was able to gain muscle without a quirk. What idiocy! As if having a quirk changed how simple muscles functioned. Scratch that. There was probably a quirk out there that did just that. But that's beside the point. Most people all have the same muscle structure. Even when it comes to people with strength enhancing quirks, they usually just have more of the same structure. The email went on to mention why the entrance exam was necessary. Izuku could have guessed the reason himself, but they didn't know that, so they continued to mention that due to the discrimination faced by the quirkless community, the middle school grades almost never reflect the actual abilities of the applicant. The scores were used to determine placement and eligibility for scholarship. Izuku understood wanting to make sure the most accomplished could get a good education despite their income, but he wondered what that meant for those quirkless individuals that had both low income and didn't score high enough to get the scholarship. He thought about it critically. Whether someone has a quirk or not, completing middle school can be a challenge. They have to work every day just to make enough money to survive. That doesn't leave enough time to study, so it's not uncommon for someone to fail to graduate. And those in that situation that did make it through would more than likely score high enough to qualify. He guessed it all came down to actually graduating middle school, and the entire world was trying to beat the quirkless down. Between the students, the teachers, the administration, and the people on the street, everyone did what they could to make sure the quirkless never got anywhere in life. Izuku was actually one of the lucky ones, despite having a neglectful parental figure and basically raising himself. Because of Inko's insistence of having a perfect public reputation, Izuku didn't have to work. So he was able to teach himself whatever he wanted to know and got to where he was in life because of it. You know what they say about silver linings. Izuku sighed and leaned back in his chair. He looked at the clock. This would normally be the time he went to work, but he had the day off due to his graduation. Well, if he wasn't going to the gym, he wasn't going into work, what was he going to do for the rest of the day? He'd been so active lately that he couldn't just sit and watch TV. He had to be stimulated somehow. He began to giggle to himself. Before finding out about crime fighting, Izuku would just sit at his computer and look up hero fights and fill out his notebooks. When he was a kid, Izuku would either leave the apartment looking for fights or scour the internet looking for videos to take his mind away from the gnawing feeling in his gut when Inko hadn't bought groceries or left any money for Izuku to go purchase his own. And eventually it became more of a habit than a necessity. Izuku found himself not being hungry as he was and found joy in breaking down what makes a hero a hero. After all those fights, he saw how happy the people were after being helped by a hero, and Izuku decided he wanted to do that too. He wanted to make people smile. He wanted to be a hero. Then, once he realized that was going to be impossible, he found crime fighters. Another silver lining. Thinking about how far he had come made him feel motivated. Izuku decided he would take the entrance exam the next day. Today, he was going to research patrol routes, price some equipment, practice his martial art forms, and hopefully find a martial arts school that will teach the quirkless. He hadn't had any luck so far. All the dojos he had checked stated they did not teach quirkless individuals due to insurance reasons. They didn't want to have to pay claims if a quirkless person was injured by someone with a quirk. Izuku found it a little odd that he wasn't escorted out of the gym when the owner found out he was quirkless. He figured that wouldn't be much different, but maybe it is because it's a gym and he wouldn't be fighting other people. He wasn't really sure, and he didn't exactly want to ask in case that reminded the owner Izuku couldn't be there. And that made him think about their interaction again. God, he just can't stop thinking about it. For 10 months, he was able to go to a public place and be treated like he was normal. Then, the second he mentions being quirkless, he's insulted. At least Kimura was only being insulting. He wasn't abusive or harsh or disgusted. And didn't that just feel weird? Being treated like that had become so frequent that it was normal for Izuku, and being treated with what amounted to indifference was foreign. He really didn't know what to think about that. Izuku sat down at his computer the next day, ready to start his exam. He opened the email and clicked on the link. He had already eaten breakfast and was ready to go. He had 6 hours to complete the exam. The exam was programmed to start easy, but the questions would progressively get harder. The number of correct answers will determine his placement. There are a total of 300 questions. 200 of them are graded and the other 100 are ungraded and used as a test for future exams. Izuku will not know which are graded and which are ungraded. He must get at least 160 questions correctly to qualify for the scholarship. Izuku laces his fingers together and bends them backwards, sending a series of cracks throughout the room. He then shakes off his hands. His heart was pounding as he pushed the green start button. 3 hours later, Izuku pushed submit. He felt refreshed. For as long as he had been teaching himself, Izuku hadn't really been able to challenge himself with any tests where he couldn't just look up the answer afterwards. He loved it. The confirmation page loaded. He would be receiving his results within 72 hours. He couldn't wait. End of chapter.